Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. We are reading from Adi Lila chapter 16, verses 19 onwards. Mukham karoti vachalam pangum langhaite kirim yat kripa tamham vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om Tat Sat. Emata Bangera Lokera Kaila Mahahita now death of a daughter-in-law. Verse 23 Ghare Aila Prabhu Bahu Lana Dhan Jana Tattva Janan Gyane Kaila Shachira Dukha Vimochan. When the Lord returned home, bringing with him great wealth with many followers, he spoke to Shachi Devi about the transcendental knowledge to relieve her of the grief she was suffering. Purport: it is stated in the Bhagavad Gita 2.13, Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatrina muyati. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. Such verses from the Bhagavad Gita or any other Vedic literature give valuable instructions on the occasion of someone's passing away. By discussing such instructions from Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, a sober man can certainly understand that the soul never dies but rather passes from one body to another. This is called transmigration of the soul. A soul comes into this material world and creates bodily relationships with a father, mother, sisters, brothers, a wife and children. But all these relationships pertain to the body, not the soul. Therefore, as described in the Bhagavad Gita, Dhiras Tatrina Muhyati. One who is sober is not disturbed by such phenomenal changes within this material world. Such instructions are called Tattva Katha or real truth. Now let's move to the next verse. Verse number 24. Shishya Gana Lana Punaha Vidyar Vilas Vidya Bale Saba Jini Odha Te Prakash. After coming back from East Bengal, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu again began educating others. By the strength of his education, he conquered everyone, and thus he was greatly proud. Verse number 25. Tabe Vishnupriya Thakurani Ra Parinaya Tabe Ta Akarilya Prabhu Digvijay Jaya. Then Lord Chaitanya married Vishnupriya, the goddess of fortune, and thereafter he conquered a champion of learning named Keshav Kashmiri. Purport: in this modern day, there are many champions in sports. So in bygone days, there were many learned scholars in India who were champions in learning. One such person was Keshav Kashmiri, who came from the state of Kashmir. He traveled all over India and at last came to Navadvip to challenge the learned scholars. Unfortunately, he could not conquer the learned scholars in Navadvip, for he was defeated by the boy scholar Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Later he understood that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus he surrendered unto him and later became a pure Vaishnav in the Sampradaya of Nimbark. He wrote Kaustubh Prabha, a commentary on the Vedanta commentary of the Nimbark Sampradaya, which is known as Parijat Bhashya. The Bhakti Ratnakar mentions Keshav Kashmiri and lists his predecessors in the disciplic succession of the Nimbark Sampradaya: Srinivas Acharya, Vishwa Acharya, Purushottam, Vilas, Swarup, Madhav, Balbhadra, Padma, Shyam, Gopal, Kripa, Devacharya, Sundar Bhatta, Padmanabha, Upendra, Ramchandra, Vamana, Krishna, Padmakar, Shravana, Bhuri, Madhava, Shyama, Gopal, Balbhadra, Gopinath, Keshav, Gokul and Keshav Kashmiri. It is stated in the Bhakti Ratnakar that Keshav Kashmiri was a favorite devotee of Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. By her grace, he was an extremely influential scholar, and he was the greatest champion among all the scholars in the four corners of the country. Therefore, he got the title Digvijay, which means one who has conquered everyone in all directions. He belonged to a very respectable Brahmana family of Kashmir. Later, by the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave up the profession of winning championships and became a great devotee. He joined the Nimbark Sampradaya, one of the Vaishnav communities of the Vedic culture. Verse 26. Vrindavan das iha Karyachena Vistar Sfuta nahi kare dosha gunera vichar. Vrindavan Das Thakur has previously elaboratedly described this, that which is clear need not be scrutinized for good qualities and faults. Verse 27, say amsha kahi tanre kari namaskar ya shuni digvijay kaila apna dhikkar. Dhikkar is condemnation, as we know in Hindi also. It means the same thing. Translation: offering my obeisances to Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, I shall try to describe that portion of the Lord's analysis which, when he heard it, made the Digvijay feel himself condemned. Verse 28, Jyotsnavati Ratri Prabhu Shishya Gana Sange Vashiya Chena Ganga Tire Vidya Prasange. Once on a full moon night, the Lord was sitting on the bank of the Ganges with his many disciples and discussing literary topics. Verse 29, Hena Kale Digvijay Tahani Aila Gangare Vandana Kari Prabhure Milila. Coincidentally, Keshav Kashmiri Pandit came there. While offering his praise to Mother Ganges, he met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Verse number 30, Vasaila Tare Prabhu Adar Kariya Digvijay Kahe Mane Avagya Kariya. The Lord received him with adoration, but because Keshav Kashmiri was very proud, he talked to the Lord very inconsiderately. Verse 31, Vyakarana Padaha Nimani Pandit Tumar Naam Balya Shastre Loke Tumar Kahe Guna Gram. I understand that you are a teacher of grammar, he said, and that your name is Nimai Pandit. People speak very highly of your teaching of beginners' grammar. Purport: formerly, Sanskrit scholars first taught grammar very thoroughly, and this system continues even now. A student was supposed to study grammar carefully for 12 years in the beginning of his life, because if one is expert in the grammar of the Sanskrit language, all the Shastras are open to him. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was famous for teaching grammar to students, and therefore Keshav Kashmiri first referred to his position as a teacher of grammar. Keshav Kashmiri was very proud of his literary career. He was far above the first lessons of grammar, and so he thought the position of Nimai Pandit not at all comparable to his own. Verse 32, Vyakarana Madhye Jani Padaha Kalap Shunilun Fankite Tomar Shishera Samlap. Samlap in Bengali is the specific knowledge. I understand that you teach Kalpa Vyakarana. I have heard that your students are very expert in the word jugglery of this grammar. Purport: there are many schools of grammar in the Sanskrit language, the most famous of which are the systems of Panini and the Kalap and Kaumudi grammars. There are different branches of grammatical knowledge, and a student of grammar was supposed to study them all in 12 years. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was famous as Nimai Pandit, taught grammar to his students, who became experts in dealing with the word jugglery of complicated grammar. Almost anyone expert in studying grammar intercepts the Shastras in many ways by changing the root meaning of their words. A student of grammar can sometimes completely change the meaning of a sentence by juggling grammatical rules. Keshav Kashmiri indirectly taunted Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by implying that although he was a great teacher of grammar, such grammatical jugglery of root meaning did not require great expertise. This was challenged to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because it was pre-arranged that Keshav Kashmiri would have to discuss the Shastras with Nimai Pandit. From the very beginning, he wanted to bluff the Lord. Thus the Lord replied as follows. Verse number 33, Prabhu kahe Vyakarana padaye abhiman kari Shishyete na bujhe ami bujhaite nari. The Lord said, yes, I am known as the teacher of grammar, but factually I cannot express my students with grammatical knowledge, nor can they understand me very well. Since Keshav Kashmiri was a little puffed up, the Lord increased his artificial pride by presenting himself as subordinate to him. Thus he flattered him as follows. Verse 34, कहाँ तुम्ही सर्वशास्त्रे कवित्वे प्रवीण, कहाँ आम्ही सबे शिशु पढूया नवीन. My dear sir, whereas you are a very learned scholar in all sorts of scriptures and are very much experienced in the composing poetry, I am only a boy, a new student, and nothing more. Verse 35. Tomar kavitva kichu shunite haye mana, kripa kari akar yadi gangar varnana. Therefore, I desire to hear your skill in composing poetry. We could hear this if you would mercifully describe the glories of Mother Ganges. Verse 36. Shunya Brahman Garve Varnite Lagila Ghati Ghati Eke Shata Shloka Gangara Varnila. When the Brahman Keshav Kashmiri heard this, he became still more puffed up, and within 1 hour he composed 100 verses describing Mother Ganges. Verse 37. Shunya Karila Prabhu Bahuta Satkar Toma Sama Prithive Kavi Nahi Ar. The Lord praised him, saying, Sir, there is no greater poet than you in the entire world. Verse 38. Tomar Kavita Shloke Bujite Kar Shakti Tumi Bhala Jan Artha Kimva Saraswati. Your poetry is so difficult that no one can understand it but you and Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Purport: replying to Keshav Kashmiri sarcastically, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu indirectly minimized the value of his poetry by saying, Yes, your compositions are so nice that no one but you and your worshipable mother, the goddess of learning, can understand them. Keshav Kashmiri was a favorite devotee of Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as the master of the goddess of learning, has the right to speak sarcastically of her devotees, of his devotees. In other words, although Keshav Kashmiri was proud of being favored by the goddess of learning, he did not know that she is controlled by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, because he is the supreme personality of Godhead. I will read that line again. Keshav Kashmiri was a favorite devotee of Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as the master of the goddess of learning, which is Goddess Saraswati, has the right to speak sarcastically of her devotees. In other words, although Keshav Kashmiri was proud of being favored by the goddess of learning, he did not know that she is controlled by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, because he is the supreme personality of Godhead. Verse 39. Eka shlokera artha yadi kar nija mukhe, shuni sab lok tabe paiba bada sukhe. But if you explain the meaning of one verse, we can all hear it from your own mouth and thus be very happy. Verse number 40. Tabe digvijay vyakhyara shloka puchila shata shlokera eka shloka prabhu ta padila. The Digvijay Keshav Kashmiri inquired which verse he wanted to explain. The Lord then recited one of the 100 verses Keshav Kashmiri had composed. Verse 41. Mahatvam Gangaya Satatam Idam Abhati Nitram Yad Esha Shri Vishnosh Charana Kamalotpati Subhaga Dvitiya Shri Lakshmir Eva Sur Narair Archya Charana Bhavani Bharturya Shirasi Vibhavati Adbhuta Guna. The greatness of Mother Ganges always brilliantly exists. She is the most fortunate because she emanated from the lotus feet of Shri Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. She is the second goddess of fortune, and therefore she is always worshipped both by demigods and by humanity. Endowed with all wonderful qualities, she flourishes on the head of Lord Shiva. Verse 42. Eish lokera arthakara prabhu yadi baila vismit hana digvijay prabhure puchila. When Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked him to explain the meaning of this verse, the champion, very much astonished, inquired from him as follows. Verse 43. Janjavat praya ami shlok padila tar madhye shlok tumi Kaiche Kante Kaila. I recited all the verses like the blowing wind, which is Jhanjavat. How could you completely learn by heart even one among those verses? Verse 44, Prabhu kahe devera vare tumi kavi vara aiche devera vare keho haya shruti dhara. The Lord replied, by the grace of the Lord, someone may become a great poet, and similarly, by his grace, someone else may become a great Shrutidhara who can memorize anything immediately. Purport: in this connection, Shrutidhara is a very important word. Shruti means learning, and Dhara means one who can capture. Formerly, before the beginning of Kali Yuga, almost everyone, especially among the intelligent men, the Brahmanas, was a Shrutidhar. As soon as a student heard any of the Vedic wisdom from his master, he would remember it forever. There was no need to refer to books, and therefore there were no written books in those days. The spiritual master delivered the Vedic hymns and their explanations to the student, who would then remember them forever without consulting books. To become Shrutidhar, one who can remember simply by hearing, is a great achievement for student. In the Bhagavad Gita 10.41, the Lord says, Yadyat vibhuti mat sattvam shrimad urjitam eva va tad eva gaccha tvam mama tejo amsha sambhavam. Know that all opulent, beautiful and glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. As soon as we find anything extraordinary, we should understand that such an extraordinary manifestation is the special grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied to the champion Keshav Kashmiri that just as he was greatly proud of being a favorite devotee of Mother Saraswati, so someone else like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, being favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, could become like a Shrutidhar and thus memorize anything immediately simply by hearing it. So how wonderful that the Supreme Personality is explaining to someone so clearly the intricacies which people don't understand sometimes. How come there's so much, how come people have got the opulences in minute quantities? The qualities are coming from the Lord, but they are surely in minute quantity. But some are endowed with big qualities as well. So let's read the last verse for today, verse number 45 from chapter 16, the Adi Lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Shlokera artha kaila vipra paya santosha prabhu kahe kahe shlokera kiba gunadosh. We read this, we say this word in the evening Gaurarti, kiba. Kiba is what are. Guna, we understand, is the qualities. Satisfied by the statement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Brahman Keshav Kashmiri explained the quoted verse. Then the Lord said, now kindly explain the special qualities and faults in the verse. Purport: not only did Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu pick out this one among the 100 verses and remember it, although the Brahman had recited them like the blowing wind, but he also analyzed its qualities and faults. Not only did he hear the verse, but immediately made a critical study of it. So, in other words, Lord not only remembered the verse, but critically analyzed it as well. So this was the last verse for today from chapter 16 of the Adi Lila. Thank you for joining. We will again continue tomorrow, and as you can see, we have got Gaura Nitai blessing us during our reading. Hariam Tat Sat, Hare Krishna.